charter flights to Mars, indoor aquaponic sustainably farmed greens, and fish with the highest ecological and quality standards, channeling renewable forms of energy to replace those that cause harm. No, you haven't stepped forward in time to some futuristic utopia. It's all happening now. See, the events of the past year, and even just this week, can test anyone's faith. If you've been struggling to see the good when it feels like there's so much bad happening all around us, this episode, in which Tony interviews visionary leaders who are finding solutions to large-scale global problems like hunger, might serve to restore your faith and even fuel your optimism for a shared future. As you'll hear, the best is yet to come.
Welcome, everybody, to the Tony Robbins podcast. I'm real excited for today because you're going to meet four extraordinary human beings that are world-changing technology experts, founders of companies, CEOs and founders that are putting together companies that aren't just ideas. They're right now moving forward and they're beginning to do things that literally can change the lives of billions of people. And there's no hyperbole or exaggeration in that. Most of you know I'm so passionate about anything that can increase the quality of people's lives, and I'm obsessed with finding answers and solutions. I'm also obsessed in finding entrepreneurs and companies that are about to change the world and being a part of that, trying to help in any way I can with them, investing in them, going on the ride with them, so together we can have this experience of just increasing that quality of life. So we're talking about breakthrough CEO founders here today, four of them, in areas that really impact the quality of life on Earth. Again, sounds like such hype, doesn't it? But it's really true. And, in a world where we every day hear so much about the pandemic or about the economy or about whatever, you got to understand that, people get stuck in what's right in front of them. When things are going terribly, people think things are going to go terrible forever. When things are going great, people think it's going to go great forever. And life is not like that. Life is this process of circular history, but also the overall, like if you see a straight line, it's not in nature. A straight line is drawn by a man or a woman, by a human. In nature, things grow by going up and down a little bit, up and down. But if you're really successful, the overall arc is up. And we as a society have these different waves that affect us. There's economic waves. There is, virus waves. But one of the most powerful waves in humanity today is technology. Technology used right can change everything. What once was scarce becomes abundant. My dear friend Peter Diamandis has a perfect little metaphor he uses. He goes, there aren't enough apples until you got a ladder. And all of a sudden there's an abundance of apples you couldn't reach before. Those simple technologies can literally change our lives, and they have. I remember looking back in 1996, 97, there was, at the time, extreme poverty. There was 1.7 billion people in extreme poverty living on less than $2 a day. Today, it's 227 million. So literally in this short period of time, we've taken almost 1.5 billion people plus out of poverty. It's still too many as far as I'm concerned, but it's because of new tools and technologies that we can do this. So this is a session, strap yourself in to both learn about how to grow companies, but more importantly, learn about tools and technologies, how they come into reality and what's coming now that could change the quality of your life forever. So let me introduce our panel for starters. First person here is my dear friend, Bill Gross. How are you, Bill?
Great, thanks. Great to be here.
If you don't know Bill, he's a legend. This is a guy that started his first solar company in high school. He founded a company called Idea Labs, which started in 1996. It's the longest running technology incubator in history. 150 companies have been started out of this one incubator, and 45 of those companies have been IPO'd. Bill is the only entrepreneur alive that has started 7 companies from scratch and exited them over $1 billion in revenue. There's nobody quite like him. It's a privilege to have you here, Bill. And we're going to talk to Bill about is some of the new companies he has that are going to change the environment. Again, there are people promising things in the future. This is happening right now as we speak. If you're worried about global warming and you're worried about cutting back all of the resources of humanity as opposed to finding a better way to transform it, Bill has got answers that are going to blow you away and you're going to enjoy immensely. Next is a person close to my heart because most of you know I care very deeply about hunger in this world. And we have a real problem. Some of you know that I've started an X Prize. I put the first million up. It's a $15 million X Prize to feed the next billion people that are coming into humanity. We're growing very rapidly in our population still, and we're destroying the planet the way we raise food. And so this person, Jason Green, is the CEO and co-founder of a place called Upward Farms. A Brooklynite. How you doing there, brother? Good to see you.
I'm great, Tony. How are you?
Welcome to have you here. You're with a last name like Green, you had to be a farmer, right? It's built into
right.
unconscious.
Yeah, That one my dad gave me.
But what's really interesting, we'll come back to as we go into your story a little bit. He started out as a neuroscience researcher at Albert Einstein Medical School, and he helped patients. He built VR, virtual reality tools to help people lost the ability to walk again. And now he's building these vertical aquaponic sustainable farms for leafy greens and fish. It's most of you probably are aware that the cost of food worldwide, about half of it roughly, and am I correct on this, Jason, is it 40%, 50%? That's just transportation, getting the food to you. And he's showing us how we can grow that food where we live, in these big urban centers, in these cities. It's great to have you here, Jason. And then thirdly, we have here Mikhail Kokorich. And Mikhail here's a guy that started his first company at 19 years old. He's from Russia. He has this vision, he built the first, private space company, in Russia, sold that company at a very young age, decided he wanted to come to America, and he wants to power humanity into the solar system. He wants to make sure that when the inevitable happens and the sun takes us out, that humanity can continue to succeed. And the first steps is trying to maximize what we're doing right now in this space race that's happening between some of the big boys out there, like Virgin and Blue Origin and so forth. And he's got some tools that are just incredible, like the ability to propel these spaceship and satellites with water. And it's 3 times cheaper, it's safer, it's more efficient. And as we're going to discover, there's water on the moon, there's water on Mars, there's water on asteroids. I mean, this is a way to provide the fuel to literally propel us throughout the solar system and beyond. Brilliant, man. Great to have you, Mikhail. Thank you for being here.
Thank you.
So, and then finally, my dear friend and my partner, and that's Dakin Sloss. Dakin is the founder, and he's the general partner of Prime Movers Lab. They invest in breakthrough scientific startups, and they're really obsessed with finding what they call prime movers, which is people that are inventors of technology that can transform billions of people's lives. And they invest in the seed stage, in those early stages, in reinventing energy and transportation and infrastructure and human augmentation and computing. And they pick a small number of companies they focus on so they can over deliver and give maximum impact. And so you all know I'm partners with him. So I got in partnership with him because I was so blown away by the impact that he's had on the companies he's there. A lot of VC type firms, they give you some money and they set you up and push you a little bit, but how much care do they really give? How much can they make a difference in the company? And Dakin, you and your wife, Gabby, have really, this all started with you and I, because you were a platinum partner in a Lion, and we started getting in deep conversations about what you're doing. I was completely blown away. So I want to thank you for being here, and I want to start with you. How are you doing, brother?
I'm doing great. It's such an honor to be on with you and with these 3 amazing human beings. We're in a business where it's really about the CEOs and the incredible leaders that are making a huge difference in the world. And I'm honored every day to get to work with Mikhail and Bill and Jason, and hopefully have a small part to play in the much bigger challenges we face as a civilization.
Well, let's get right to it. There's a common thread. The reason we brought all 4 of you together on here, and especially the 3 that are running these individual companies, is that you're all CEO founders that have a unique level of technological expertise that you bring to the table. You're not just the CEO, and you have visions that are extraordinary. It's not just how do I build a business and sell a bunch of widgets, it's how do I change the world. Lots of people say that, but you are all in stages in your company where it's no longer a vision. You're starting to maximize and make that happen. So I'd like to start by asking each of you one at a time, can you tell me just a brief aspect of how the story of your company, how it came about, and what's unique about your company? What are you really trying to build today through this company? And I think we'll start with you, Bill, because, just to remind everybody, Bill's a guy that's built 150 companies, right? These are companies across every area you could imagine, different industries. And Bill, you've seen so much of these last 24 years since you started, your Idea Labs format. Tell me, there are 3 companies. We'll talk about some in the depth. I know you want to talk about Heliogen, but if I may, there's 3 companies that you have evolved that all have to do with changing the environment, right? And the environment there is, one of the challenges we have, most of you know, is that today, solar and wind are actually cheaper than petroleum for the first time in history, but there isn't the storage capacity. So I'm wondering if you might talk a little about the storage company, and then secondly about Heliogen and what it's providing. And then thirdly, just a little bit about carbon capture. I know maybe just an overview of how you came to be in this position and what it is you're trying to accomplish.
Well, thank you, Tony. I really feel that what you said earlier is maybe the most important thing on Earth right now, which is help the planet in every way possible. You talked about lifting people out of poverty, lifting 1 billion people out of poverty. I think that the number one thing that can lift people out of poverty is low-cost energy. Low-cost energy is what has made civilization possible. And the challenge has been, we've been getting our low-cost energy by burning things. If we can get our low-cost energy in a renewable way, then we can really have unlimited amounts of it and not cause any harm. Yeah. So I got very passionate about all the side benefits that would happen if I could focus my mechanical engineering talent on the energy problem. And I'm thinking about it from a standpoint of just making the world better, not even worrying about the benefits on climate change, or you don't even have to believe in climate change to believe in just giving people a better life. Yes. And energy can give that to people. So I feel like if you look across all the United Nations development goals to give people freedom and security and education, all the things, energy is behind every one of them. So I feel like there's a lot of leverage there. So that got me excited about making low-cost solar energy that could be around the clock, low-cost materials that can be made from the sun. So cheap, better concrete, better steel, better aluminum that can be made with concentrated sunshine. And then, as you said, energy storage, because we can now make energy for the first time ever, cheaper than fossil fuels, but it only comes when the sun is shining or when the wind is blowing. So if we can hold on to that energy till when we need it, like after the sun goes down, or to have it on demand. So making cheap energy storage turns out to be very, very hard. Like batteries are very, very challenging to make them cheap enough on a bulk scale. Batteries are now cheap enough to be used in cars. Well, first they were cheap enough to be used in our devices. That was easy. Then cars, that was next challenging. But to make batteries cheap enough to power the entire grid, that's really hard. So I started looking at other ideas, other ways to store energy. And we came up with this gravity method that is Energy Vault.
And if you might mention, we'll go in depth later on, but Energy Vault, explain to them how simple it is and how it came up, the concept, you and the team, the idea of the most, effective way of getting energy in the past, at least the least, destructive has been, as I understand it, when you're using hydropower. Tell them what a simple idea it is and let them know how big it's grown, like the size of orders you're getting now for this simple solution that can allow us to have energy 24/7 from the sun.
Well, most of the energy in the world today is used as it's made, meaning 99% of every electron made by every generator in the world gets used as it's made, and only 1% is stored. But that 1% is currently stored by pumping water up a hill. Basically, you look around the earth for a mountain where there's a reservoir on the top and a reservoir on the bottom. You fill the thing with water on the bottom. When you have excess energy, like when the generators are producing power that people don't need, you pump water up the mountain to the top and you sit in that reservoir. When you want to get it back, you let the water flow back down, turn a turbine the other direction, make electricity, and you get 90% of it back or 80% of it back because of friction losses. Well, the problem is that's relatively effective, but all those mountains are used up. Everywhere where there's a reservoir up there and a reservoir down there, someone's bought that and turned it into what's called pumped hydropower, where you pump it up and then get it back.
Basically a dam, that you're using a dam like they do in Vegas, right? That's basically what we're talking about.
Exactly. So the only way to get a new location for pumped hydro is to build a dam in a valley, but then you destroy that area because now you've stopped the river from flowing to get your mountain, your mountain of water. So we were trying to figure out a way, how could you simulate that, but without destroying any land and without needing a mountain? So we were trying to look for ways. Well, what about if we built our own mountain? Like, what about if we made a big mound of dirt? Or what about if we made a big column of cement and filled it with water and pumped the water up inside the column and had it come down to a pool? And what about if we made we tried all these ideas, but they were all too expensive. And that's the reason why no one's done it. They were too expensive. But then the idea occurred to us of making blocks and stacking them. So effectively, we build a mountain every day by stacking up the blocks and unstacking them. We'd have a crane lift them up automatically. Since it's going to be running continuously, you can't have a crane operator there. So you have to write software to make it all work autonomously. We had to use cameras to locate the blocks, clever stacking sequence. But effectively, by stacking a bunch of 35-ton blocks, they're big blocks, 35-ton blocks, they're 1 meter by 2 meters by 4 meters tall, you can build a 25-story building each day with extra energy, and then unbuild it each night when you need the power back. And it's actually cheaper than pumped hydro. And you can put it anywhere because you don't need a mountain, because effectively we're making a mountain every day.
So for people to understand, imagine a crane where you're using solar power and that energy that you have available in the day, the crane lifts these giant blocks. And then at night, it releases them, and that churns the turbo just like you would if you actually had, an entire dam, and you have that electricity available to you, and the efficiency is cheaper than any other source you've got. And what kind of response have you gotten from the marketplace in this so
It was
far?
incredible. First, people said we were nuts. In other words, it was a crazy idea. But a lot of good ideas start out like that. Like a breakthrough is a crazy idea up until it crosses over. That's actually a great line from Peter Diamandis. What you want to find is something in technology that can solve a big problem, but that does seem a little bit crazy until you prove the science of it. So we built the first prototype to show that it worked. We built a full-scale version to show that that really worked and delivered the economics and efficiency. And each unit stores 35 megawatt hours, which is like enough for a whole city. And each one of those units costs about $8 million. And we got orders for 12,000 of them, 1,200 of them. So $10 billion of demand for that system, like in no time. So it really is amazing how much global demand there is for energy storage. Really, really.
You can do this in the desert. You can do this anywhere. That's the beauty of this. The power of it is the elegance, how simple it is, how efficient it is. And it just, when we talk in you more depth, I want to talk about how you guys come up with these types of answers. So they don't just happen overnight. You keep iterating. That's been your history, Bill.
You said there's no straight line. That's exactly true. We had a very zigzag path to get to this. We tried a lot of things that didn't work, but we learned from each one of them and course corrected a little bit. Like, I think a good analogy to what you were describing is, I think to be a good entrepreneur, you have to be like a heat-seeking missile that is continuously adjusting as you see, there's some target out there which is elusive, and you're going to learn new things to course correct along the way. And that's what we tried to do with this idea, and it really worked.
Well, Bill, you've already got 7 companies. You're a very humble man. You're one of the most humble guys I know. I have such a love for you because you're so driven to serve. It's not about you. And I think that's why you build such great teams. Everybody wants to work with you. But this looks like it'll be your 8th company that'll do it. They got $10 billion in orders already. And tell us about, we'll talk a little more depth when we go there. I'm tempted to just keep going deep with you because there's so many pieces here. But tell us a little bit about your solar company that takes the energy of the sun and produces enough heat to drive industrial energy and why that's so important and how that affects our future.
Well, right now, a lot of our use of energy is for electricity, but a way bigger use of our energy is for heat, for making all of our built world. Like 20% of our global emissions, 20% of our global energy is just to make cement and steel and aluminum and all of the, basically energy is embedded in everything around us because that was what was used to make it. And that can't be replaced easily with electricity because that requires high temperature, high furnace industrial processes. So
traditionally that would be coal. What else? What would be the uses normally? It would
be coal and gas, and like even for cement, they burn old tires, they burn trash, they burn the worst, dirtiest stuff to make cement. So basically, cement comes out all pure and clean. We have a very pretty building, but the stuff that went into making the cement was awful and releasing terrible emissions. So we wanted to come up with a way to allow us to make those materials using the sun as well. So using a system of thousands of mirrors, imagine a field with thousands of mirrors, almost arranged, almost like petals of flowers spread out over the land. So like farming, the mirrors are spread out, but they're all computer controlled. So they reflect the sunlight to a single spot. At that single spot, we can achieve very, very high temperatures. Actually, we've achieved a third the temperature of the surface of the sun, 1,500 degrees centigrade, right from all those beams reflecting to one spot. Now with that, you can make cement, but you can make it without burning anything. You can make it completely green from the sun. So we want to try and take this same technology at Heliogen and apply it to many industrial processes to make all these building materials in a much greener way.
It's beautiful. And Bill Gates has, I know, been an investor in that. And then the last one I want to ask you about, and again, we'll go deeper later, but with you, there's 3. Carbon capture. Mark Benioff, my dear friend, and I were the first 2 people to invest with you on that one. It was just a concept. Tell people what you're doing. So many people are worried that we've been hearing these factors like in 12 years, we're beyond the point of no return, and a lot of fear out there. A lot of people trying to figure out what to do, then hear contrary information. But you've got practical solutions. One of the things I love about you is it's like you said, you don't have to be green or you don't have to worry about the environment. We're going to make this so it's economically feasible. Tell us a little bit about carbon capture and what you're moving on in that area.
Well, there's 2 ways to avoid the CO2 in the atmosphere. The first is not to put it there in the first place, but the second is to maybe take it out. And there are some processes that will be very, very hard to avoid putting in the atmosphere, like aviation. It's very, very hard to make a solar-powered airplane to go a long distance. You can make a very small plane that can travel a short distance, but to have intercontinental travel, you're going to need to burn fuel. So what if we can take the CO2 from that fuel back out of the atmosphere after it was already placed in there from an airplane? Well, how do you do that? Well, it takes energy to do that. If it takes energy to do that and you burn fossil fuels to make that energy, it defeats the purpose.
Yeah.
But if it takes energy to do that and you can use solar energy to do that, then you could actually do it in a clean way. And if you can take that CO2 out for less than the value that it has being taken out, you can actually do it profitably. So my goal is to come up with a solar powered way at this company, Carbon Captured, to use heat from the sun to take the CO2 back out of the atmosphere and then turn that back into something useful such that people will pay more for that than it cost me to take out. Thus, it can be a scalable business. And It's very challenging, but the physics completely says it's possible. So it's an engineering challenge. It's not a breaking any laws of physics challenge.
Yes.
And I love it when there's an engineering challenge because that means that just smart brains can get together and solve it. And a little bit like you said, the beautiful thing about technology today is you can use your brain power and make something that has global impact because the whole world is now your customer. I think of the businesses I started 25 years ago. They were little businesses that you make a product, you have to sell it, you got to put it in a retail store, you got to find customers, there's no internet, you can't reach people. Now you have a global marketplace for what you're making. So if you make something that impacts people's lives, it can touch the whole planet. And that's why brain power has it's a little bit like the Archimedes, give me a lever long enough, I can move the earth. Now you can use your brain power to really move the earth in a positive direction. And that's what's so exciting about entrepreneurship right now.
Last question, then we're going to come back to you, but I want to get to the next entrepreneurs. What does the future of energy look like then in your mind, and how far out is it?
Well, I think this decade, we can make energy round the clock cheaper than fossil fuels.
Yes.
And up to now, solar energy, renewable energy was more expensive than fossil fuels, or it was only less expensive for a few hours of the day.
Yeah.
My goal is to make it cheaper than fossil fuels all day long. If you can do that, then why would you burn fossil fuels? It's just cheaper. So yeah. I think the way to make people shift is not to beg them or cajole them or tell them it's better for them. Just make it economical. If you make it economical, everybody will want to do it. I really do think that money drives this. So I think that's the way I have to go.
It really does, because you see things like California where, they've been trying to be a lead in the country by creating regulations about using green and renewable fuels. But then you see all these blackouts that are occurring because they don't have the storage capacity that you're now providing. That alone changes the game. That's very exciting, Bill. I feel privileged to have you as a friend and a partner and seeing what you're doing, being on the cutting edge with it. And I'm really excited for people to hear a bit more from you. Yeah, let's pop now and let's talk here with Jason Green. Jason, tell me a little about your history, if you would, and how this came about. Because as I alluded to earlier, share with us a little bit. You were researching neuroscience. You're going to become an MD, a PhD, and you created VR work to help people learn how to walk again. And now all of a sudden you're creating vertical farms, aquaponics. Tell us a little bit how that came about.
It's and Tony, thank you for having me. It's a little bit more connected than it seems. Biology at its core is, whether you're looking at a plant or you're looking at people, there's kind of fundamental laws that govern performance. And the work that we were doing in a medical context was we were developing these environments where we were controlling everything that the patient could experience. So for a patient who had lost the ability to walk because of a non-spinal cord injury, so let's say that they lost the feelings in the bottoms of their feet. Now, imagine walking around the world if you couldn't feel your feet. How would you know when to pick it up or put it down? Or imagine if you had constant vertigo. So you basically, you're lost at sea all the time. What would you do if you couldn't feel your relationship with gravity? How would you know when you're standing up straight? And so what we would do is we'd create these environments where we were controlling all of that through virtual reality for patients. So we were creating a visual environment that was showing them, it could be chasing a bullseye, or it could be their body as an avatar. And by playing with the sensory environment that we were showing these patients, we could attune them so they could be more sensitive to, for example, if they lost their inner ear equilibrium system, they have constant vertigo, we could train them to rely more on vision. And so it was through that process of creating these environments that ultimately brought me to indoor agriculture. The fundamental argument in indoor agriculture is the same. You've got this biological thing, in this case, a plant instead of a human patient. And as an operator, you're controlling everything around the plant. You're controlling the temperature, you're controlling the light, you're controlling the humidity, you're controlling the nutrition environment. So you're creating the sensory environment for the plant. And having come from designing environments around improving the performance of the most complex system in the known universe of the human brain, how you could do that for plants was pretty straightforward. And coming at it from the angle of a computational biologist, the key thing is you have to figure out how that system computes its environment. How does it take that information in and turn it into meaningful outputs? And so the labs that I worked in a neuroscience context had spent years figuring out those models for human brain performance. And a lot of the companies in indoor agriculture are developing these models around plants. And what we felt was missing was this concept of the microbiome. The microbiome is this invisible layer of bacteria that lives in and around all living things. And it can account for up to 90% of the genetic activity of organisms. And so what we felt was missing when you try to design an indoor farm that can produce extraordinary quality product at below the cost of field production, and that, to Bill's comment about making it economical, that to us is the only role that indoor agriculture, vertical farming has in the market, is if it is a more cost-effective solution than what's coming out of the field. Otherwise, you're never going to make that transition. To us, it was developing not just that model around the plant, but developing these whole ecosystems that could cultivate all the microbiology that you find in well-managed soil, because that's where all the processing is happening in biology.
And you're doing this with like 90% less use of water. I mean, I've been looking because of wanting to feed people around the planet. And even when we're putting together our $15 million X Prize to feed the next billion, one of the first things I looked at was vertical farming, because you want to get these in cities all around the world where you've got concentrations of so many human beings. And no matter what I saw, nothing was practical, nothing was pragmatic, nothing was even within the reach. And you guys are already starting to do this at a point, it sounds like, where the cost effectiveness makes it worthy of doing, not to mention the quality of the product. But how are you using so much less water and doing this and yet having a full-blown ecosystem? Can you give us a little hint of understanding?
Yeah, so the full-blown ecosystem here is, what's happening in an ecosystem. You've got animals, plants, and microbes, all that invisible stuff, what I call the microbiome. That's what's in an ecosystem. And so in our ecosystem, we're cultivating fish, and those fish are not only a source of protein. The world needs more sustainable protein. Fish consume, or to grow a fish for protein is a fraction of the carbon of producing, whether it's chicken or beef. All those terrestrial animals use a huge amount of energy, produce a huge amount of carbon. Fish, it's a tiny fraction, between a 30th and 100th of the energy to produce a pound of protein. So we're cultivating.
The challenge, of course, is we've overfished much of the oceans. We're seeing that already happening. With another billion people, we can't support it. And also, there's so much pollution. I had mercury poisoning to the point I was rushed to the hospital because I was very disciplined, just salad and fish. But it was swordfish and tuna, which they're like 50, sets. They grow to an older age. They acquire all the mercury from the smaller fish. So you're developing mercury-free fish. You're putting yourself in an environment that's cleaner. There's no E. coli. It's pretty extraordinary. Clarify that if you would.
Yeah, so because we're able to control everything about the environment, from the water conditions to the feed. What the issue with tuna out in the wild is, tuna's at the top of the food chain. So it's eating all the things that have eaten all the things that have eaten all the things. And so you end up with mercury poisoning, right? Well, what if you could grow that same fish, but control the feed that it's getting, ensure that it's the highest quality food, so that you don't have pollution, so you don't have heavy metals like mercury. And that's what we're able to do with indoor agriculture. And so our ecosystem starts with fish. We then break down all the waste from the fish it's kind of a process like brewing beer. So we're using microbes to transform their waste into an organic fertilizer. We're then growing plants in a vertical farm. We're providing all of that fertilizer directly into the plant roots. And so to your comment about reducing water use by 95%, the big issue there is we're controlling for the runoff and the evaporation. We're applying the water that has the fertilizer that's irrigating the plants directly into the roots. And so you don't have all that water loss into the ground or into the atmosphere.
Oh, it's amazing. What does the future of food look like to you? With your vision?
I think it's a lot more delicious.
I like that. It's not just efficient, but delicious. I know that's one of your passions in life. The future of food has to be more delicious and more affordable than it is today. And for us, we really started with, if we are going to enter the indoor agriculture market, it has to be cost competitive. It has to be a better option than what's coming out of the fields.
quality, of course, safety, of course. It has to be something that the consumer, that you and I want to eat for dinner. But if it's going to make a change to the marketplace overall, it's got to be more effective. So I think that what we're going to see in terms of food is it's going to be an improvement in the flavors. It's going to be an improvement in the nutrition. It's going to be an improvement in texture. All those things that you really care about in your food, and all of that will be more efficient, and you won't have to think about it. It will be by the nature of it being a more delicious and a more affordable product that the markets will transform themselves.
And it can be done locally, and it can also make a huge difference in the pollution of the planet, or lack thereof in this case. It's beautiful. I want to go deeper with you, but I want to make sure we bring Mikhail into the conversation here. Mikhail, tell us a little bit about how this came about. You've been fascinated by space from a very early age. I know you built several companies successfully over in Russia, and then you had a dream to come here. Tell us a little bit about it, and tell us about some of the breakthroughs, what this propulsion system is driven by water, if you will.
Yes, thank you. I grew up in a small Siberian village, but the space always was my dream and fascination. And when I already was a small kid, I already was thinking that finally I would like to work in this area. And I remember back in 1993 when I was 16 years old, actually in an interview to the local newspaper that I told that I want to build space propulsion and finally be engaged in space exploration. But yes, I built several companies in different industries. Even I was studied as a plasma physicist. I built companies in manufacturing, retail. But finally I hit my middle-age crisis in 35, and I decided that I need to do something interesting, and I started building the space companies. And when we started Momentus, the idea behind this was pretty simple and obvious, because the space is a new territory, and the mastering of new territories is impossible to imagine without transport. The invention of and proliferation of new means of moving, like people and goods, like railways, aviation, containers, it has created the modern economy that we know. Space exploration is not an exception. But the physical nature of this territory creates enormous challenges. Because here on Earth, we are on the bottom of this huge gravity well. To deliver cargo into orbit and defeat gravity, you need to accelerate things to the huge velocity, 8 kilometers per second. It's 20 times faster than a bullet. So, and as a result—
20 times faster than a bullet. Holy cow. That's a great metaphor to help people understand. Please continue.
And finally, less than 5% of the initial rocket starting mass reached the orbit. So the answer actually lies how to make it cheap. It's lies in reusability and in mass production. But the tyranny of this rocket science, they basically contribute to the large rocket sizes unnecessary. And it drives the strategy for companies like SpaceX and Blue Origin, who developing huge, big, gigantic reusable rockets, like SpaceX developing like Starship or New Glenn. And we will see this launch cost into space that will be just a few $100 per kilogram, and will open a lot of opportunities. But then the problem is the rocket's only efficient to launch masses into low orbit. But if you need to distribute cargo to different orbits, or deliver to the top of the gravity well, like a geosynchronous orbit, or to the moon, or different elliptical orbits, you need to add additional 3-6 kilometers per second, so another 20 speeds of bullet. And if you use conventional rockets for this, the proportion of the mass reduced from 5% to 1%. So to deliver 1 ton of a cargo, you need to start with 100 tons. In many cases, if delivered mass is much less than capability of future low-cost rockets, you need to use more expensive small and medium-sized rockets. And it all requires multimodal transportation, connecting flights, which actually never was used in space, when you have huge, cheap rockets delivering cargo to low orbit. And then last-mile space vehicles, space taxis, distributing cargo between orbits to the higher orbits. And this is why we created Momentus in 2017, because we developed these space tags and hub-and-spoke multimodal transportation to space. And we are having our first full commercial mission actually early next year in January with the Falcon 9 rideshare. But the main challenge, how to build this space taxi and this technology very cheap and very low cost. And the answer is how to build. Actually, the nature of the propellant that they're using actually contribute to the cost a lot. If you use like a chemical propulsion with this cryogenic liquid oxygen, it's expensive. If you use this like high pressure xenon, which is extremely expensive, it's also like expensive. So we come with the idea to use water as a propellant. And it's not only make our vehicles extremely cheap. I like to tell that our vehicles look like from Mad Max movie. So actually it's simple. It's damn simple. There are no moving parts. But also the water is most common mineral in a solar system. You have water everywhere. In the moon craters, you have water in asteroids. So it means we're building technology that not only have the short-term advantages, but long-term, because we have this gift given by us to us by the solar system process of evolution, the water. And we build this long-term sustainable way how humanity can move to this new element, to the solar system, to the space.
And what is it? How does that affect the average person? If I ask you, what's the future of space? What is Momentus really trying to do? And how will that benefit the average person so they get a perspective as well? Like, why do you want to create this? And what's it going to do for the average person here on Earth?
You know, the people actually do not sometimes underestimate the value of even existing space technologies. Let's imagine that tomorrow will happen some solar flare and all satellites will be disappeared. Actually, it can happen, by the way. It's like there are some probability that in case of the big solar flare, all satellites will be wiped out. What will be in this case? It's not only you will lose probably your like a TV connectivity, you will lose like a signal of the precise time, so all the cache machines stop working. You will lose like a GPS signal, so there are no navigation, there are no paper maps, and then people cannot use, Uber Eats, DoorDash. It will be hunger all over, like because people cannot now like get the food. I mean, we so much living with this, but actually it's not enough even now like a space sensors. For example, it was a huge forest fires in California, and I was a CEO of one of the largest forest company in the world, and I knew that if you can detect the forest fire within 1 hour after it started, you can actually easily to fix it with just helicopter or with drones. But now there are no satellite constellation that can detect it within 1 hour. It can take maybe once a day. Or for even agriculture, I mean, to collect data about soil moisture content, there are no a satellite constellation that collect this data. I'm not talking even about internet. We're living here in the Bay Area and we don't have cellular coverage in some places. So there are no internet. So hopefully with a Starlink and other projects, it actually create a new category of services. Space economy is pretty small now. So just $400 billion. It's 0.1% of global GDP. But what we believe that we are on the verge of this new big gold rush in space. And it will be many applications and many new users that can drive this economy to become $1 trillion and change all our life.
Wow. And again, I want people to know this is not something that you're dreaming about. You got contracts at NASA. I saw your stock just dropped almost 30%. Is that right? Was that the number I saw? People are starting to jump on and say, wow, he's got a technology that can make us have space travel be so much cheaper. And also all these resources, moving satellites around, there's so much space junk people don't realize that's out around the Earth now that's starting to fall into the atmosphere. It's starting to become a real issue, but no one's even thought about space trash before. But you have the ability to propel and move things in a different position or capture them. So it's pretty darn exciting what you're doing.
Yeah.
So if I asked you the future of space, what does that look like coming through your eyes as a pioneer working with these other pioneers?
I think the final future of space that it will become more self-sustainable. So people will use the space and space applications to do many things, for manufacturing, for energy production, for data mining, for asteroid mining, for getting all this rare and precious metals from the moon or from other asteroids. And it sounds like a fiction, but actually we see that the number of satellites that launched, 10 years ago, it was launched 70 satellites. This year, up to now, it was launched more than 1,100 satellites.
1,100 satellites this year alone. That's wild.
Just this year alone. And 10 years ago, it was launched just 70 satellites a year. And this just now, it's 100 No, 1,100 satellites alone this year.
How many satellites are around the Earth right now, circulating around? Do you know?
Around 10,000.
10,000 satellites. Wow.
Yeah, 10,000 satellites. Yeah, and launch cost dropped significantly. Basically to order of magnitude. It used to be $100,000. Now it's like just few $1,000s. It will be few $100s, and it will open so many new ways how to use the space.
Yeah, manufacturing, like you said, mining, all these things. I mean, Elon Musk shares your vision, but you're filling a void for these gentlemen who are these great visionaries that are building these huge rockets. You're filling the void of how to connect and move these things into different locations. Very exciting. Congratulations.
Yep.
Let's go to Dakin, if I may. Dakin Sloss, brother, how are you?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me on, Tony.
Great to have you, man. Tell us a little bit about, you have a unique history. You started out moving in one direction of life. You've made this U-turn or your V-turn, so to speak. And now you're seeming to collect some of the smartest people in the business. I know your fund is, performing at a level. I got a call from Paul Tudor Jones or an email from him the other day, and he was saying, copied the email with someone else telling him about he has money in your fund, but saying we should do some more with this fund. And he called me and said, tell me more about this guy. Is this really real? And in the letter, it talked about you might have some of the highest returns since 2018 for VC funds, or at least in the top grouping. Tell us a little bit about your journey and tell us what you're really driven by. And what are some of these companies, that you've been pulled to that are really changing the planet or have a chance to change the quality of life on Earth?
Well, thank you for having me on, Tony. To start, my journey is I was a physicist and mathematician studying at Stanford, and I thought I was going to go work on academic pursuits. And I really realized I wanted to have an impact on the world here, today, and now. And the way to do that is to build companies like Mikhail and Bill and Jason are doing. And I previously built 2 tech companies. And my experience was I was actually sitting in the hot tub with Gabby and talking about how broken VC is. And I just wrote a blog post about this today. The notion of founder-friendly VC today is someone cuts you a check and leaves you alone, which tells you what the other VCs are doing, which is messing everything up by getting in your way and giving you advice about stuff that they shouldn't be giving you advice and thinking they have the answers ultimately. Yeah. And I as an entrepreneur was kind of complaining about it. And Gabby's like, you're an entrepreneur, go build a product that fixes this. And Prime Movers Lab is the product that fixes it, because we're actually actively engaged in supporting our founders. And at the same time, we're humble enough to know that, if you've heard the things that they're building right now, nobody knows the answer for how to build these things. We got to figure it out together. And we can kind of take, expert lessons. We've taken a lot of lessons from you, Tony, and that they've applied that help them accelerate. But we've got to figure out how to apply it, because these are such brand new contexts. And so, at the end of the day, the thing that motivates me is each of these companies has the ability to radically improve the quality of human life. And I think we do get bombarded by so much negative news, but at the end of the day, this is the most exciting time to be alive. If we compare to what it was like to live 100 years ago, 500 years ago, 1,000 years ago, the quality of life today is already outstanding and extraordinary, and it's due to technology. And in the next decade, the level of improvement in the average human being's life, and in the next 30 years, kings would have killed to be poor today. It's just so incredible.
Yeah. I always tell people that. I always say, listen, a pharaoh, what would a pharaoh have given to be able to fly, right? To go to some place in a few hours that we complain about sometimes instead of a few months or years or never. What would they, a pharaoh couldn't afford to have someone make you a 2-hour movie to entertain you for $150 million. And we paid $10 for it today. Like, people have lost track of how great life is. So, tell me, what kinds of returns have you seen by finding these early stage companies and what all these entrepreneurs have said? Maybe I'll put a link for those interested to know more about what you do, because I encourage you to make a video with all these founders telling about what you've done. And it's mind-boggling how you brought the key resources they've needed, not just the capital, but the resources, the people, the elements to really grow their businesses. Tell us a little bit about what kind of growth are you seeing in your fund, and what is your vision going forward?
Yeah, we are fortunate that our first fund is on track to be one of the best performing funds of 2018, if not the best performing fund of 2018. It's too early to tell. And I think at the end of the day, though, that doesn't have to do with us. That has to do with the quality of the CEOs, the quality of the visions that they're pursuing. I love, I'll butcher this quote, it's one of yours, but you get the level of insight based on the level of impact that you're going out to have. And Obviously we're excited to make money, but most of the money we make goes to the same types of causes that you're contributing to and supporting. Much more important is that impact that we can have, and amazing human beings have shown up in our lives because of the impact that we're going to have and because of the contribution that we're going to have. And I think, people get this idea around impact. Like, I wouldn't call it we're doing impact investing, because I think the term has been tainted by a lot of people who went out to go fix a problem, but didn't think about the economics in the way that Bill, for example, is thinking about the economics. There was a whole wave of clean technology that didn't deliver on the promise because people were on starry-eyed visions, like, no pun intended, out in space. And the amazing thing about what we're doing is it's all backed up by science. It's all backed up by hard facts. It's all backed up by cost models where we can see the unit economics of these companies, and we can understand this is not just going to work, it's going to be wildly profitable for their partners, their customers, and for everybody around them. And I think that combination of big vision with like really grounded in like, what can we deliver in the next 12 months? What can our revenues be? What can our unit economics be is important. And it's something that has been divorced in VC, where you get these big visions, but they're just not actually tied to anything real.
I think a lot of, quote, impact investing, like you said, was people saying, I'm going to invest in something because it has the promise to make a difference. But as you said, there were no cost models. And so the returns on many of those have been mediocre, to say the least. And so what I love is this combination of being driven by impact, but with the hard science to show that you can scale something, and then figuring out, as Bill does, and all three have been doing, how do I make sure that you don't have to care about impact to use this technology? You want to use this technology because it's cheaper, better, faster, and that's what gives you the competitive edge. Listen, all of you have built companies from scratch that have tremendous potential. Lots of people have visions, but rarely do people realize those visions. All of you are realizing them right now. You're already realizing them on a huge scale. Some of you have sold previous companies. I'd like each of you, and I'll start with you, Dakin, because you see the common pattern. No, maybe I'll end with you because you see the common patterns. Let me go back to Bill. What do you think are the most important keys for entrepreneurs out there? We have people out there just starting businesses. We have entrepreneurs that are, running billion-dollar companies that started from scratch. What do you think is the difference between the person that envisions it and finally executes it, which is such a small percentage, and those that, keep dreaming about it, they're excited about it, they work at it, but they never get there? What's the difference between envisioning and realization of that vision? Let's start with you, Bill.
Boy.
I like small questions. As you
Yeah.
Because anybody asked Bill, it's you, 150 companies, right? 45 IPOs,
First of all, you have to be passionate about what you're doing for sure, because that's not enough, but it's a requirement. Because no matter what you do, you're going to face hard times. And if you're doing that zigzag path, making it through the zag is challenging. There's always going to be some valley of death in between that you have to cross. And you have to be passionate to make it through that. So that's a given. But more than that, you have to build a complementary team. You have to get people who have the other skills that you don't have. And I know when I started out in business, I was looking for people like me, people I liked hanging out with. That I needed to find more people that weren't like me. I needed to find people who knew how to run the trains on time. I've got big ideas, but you have to execute. I had to find people who knew how to keep the books and keep the payroll and get the rent and all that. So I needed to find other talent, and I needed to find people who were glue between people who didn't work well together. I needed to make people work well together. I had to learn those talents myself, but I had to get those talents into the company first. So surrounding yourself with complementary skills is very, very important. I would say the biggest thing, if you want to make a business, though, really that has a world-changing impact, you have to do something that other people aren't doing. Like, you're hearing that from every idea you're hearing from today. We're all doing things that are a little bit contrary to the way other people are doing things.
Yes.
And so you have to be contrary but right. Like it's very easy to do something the same as everybody else, and you could be okay, but it's not gonna. You have a lot of competition because everybody's doing the same thing. You can be contrary and wrong. That's very easy, but you need to be contrary and right. So I think that a very important part of making a successful business, and I always love looking for this in everything I'm working on, is what's my angle? What is the new thing that I know that's different than what other people know, that they don't believe yet, but will be true? And I'm going to go make it true. Like I have something that I figured out before most people have figured it out. And so looking for that essence in your business is very valuable and I think important to make something impactful. It's not easy. That's a very high bar. Like you don't come across those every single day.
Yes.
But taking your idea and looking at it over and over from different angles and figuring out what's my twist, where everybody else is going this way, how can I go a little bit this way where they're not going yet, but that's still correct. I'm not doing it just to go different. To just be different from everybody else, that doesn't count. Yeah. But it's got to be different and better for a reason, and understanding that reason and then doubling down on that. So I think that's very valuable to make a business work, and I try and look for that all the time.
That's beautiful. I think one of the biggest mistakes people make is the one you started with, which is they surround themselves with people who think the same way because it's encouraging. But you need all those different hats on your team in order to get the job done. And also your point, I actually teach this to business owners. It's like if you do what everybody else does in your industry and you do it significantly better than everybody else, you get a micro improvement.
Right, exactly.
But if you do something that no one else is doing in your industry and it works, or it has an advantage that's coming, you get a geometric advantage over everybody else, and you become the brand in that industry. And you've done that over and over and over again through many industries. When we come back and we're talking just with you, by the way, I want to prepare you. I want you to share the story of Google and AdWorks, because people have no clue that you're the one that really got that ball started. And it's an interesting story. So I'm going to call on you for that later. Just plant the seed in your head, if I may, Bill. Mikhail, let me ask you, let me pop over there, because you come from a different culture initially in Russia and so forth. Tell us, what do you think is the difference between those people that dream about things versus those who actually realize it? What are the components that make the difference between those that dream and those that perform?
Yeah, this is an excellent question. We all see in our career experience people with a bright spot who has like the different combination of the qualities, but sometimes it's difficult for them to become entrepreneurs. And entrepreneurship, it's different than even leadership. I think like entrepreneurs usually have inside themselves like several persons, like a little bit schizophrenics. We're all a little bit schizophrenics, because from one hand, we should be in order to move forward, because there are value of moving forward and making mistakes rather than sometimes thinking, because you are learning from mistakes, and you will have a lot of failures. You will have a lot of setbacks. So you need to be stubborn, insensitive, thick-skinned person. Otherwise, this like a constant failures, just they will destroy you as a person. But from another hand, you need to be sensitive and tender to people, to new ideas, to like everything what's happening around, like market, people, and to be one person with this like two sometimes very discrepant, contradictory qualities. It's pretty rare. I mean, and this is probably the reason why it's not so many people actually can be entrepreneurs. For many, it's really hard. It's psychologically hard. It's a very painful.
So the first is the capacity to push through those failures and learn from those failures, but also not to get stuck with one approach. Because I've seen a lot of entrepreneurs, they get stuck with one thing. They believe it's the right thing and they don't stay open to new ideas. It's my idea or the highway. And I know, Bill, I see you nodding your head. We both have seen so many companies where they had brilliant ideas. And if they just, it wasn't enough just to persist. It was the capacity to test and retest and be willing to fail and call failure learning, which is what it is. It's failure when you don't learn anything, right? But if you learn something, you move forward. But that combination, Mikhail, I know you've done. It's the only reason you've succeeded at the level you have, because you've constantly made those corrections to get where you want to go, to find these tools that can literally change the way we travel through space. Jason, how about for yourself? You know, you've looked at things from the medical perspective. You're looking at now from an environmental perspective, a human perspective. What do you think makes that difference? Because you've seen so many businesses also with great ideas, great entrepreneurs, lots of persistence, a lot of passion, and then they just never deliver. What's the difference between the one that delivers no matter what, finds the way, and those that don't?
I think there's a couple things in what Bill and Mikhail have shared, and I want to use Dakin as an example again and continue to pick on him. I do think that a compelling vision is where it all starts. And if you look at across the portfolio for Dakin, for example, this is very clear picture of what the world can, should, and will look like. And I think for every entrepreneur, every great entrepreneur holds this vision of what the world can, should, and will look like. And then there's this I think in great entrepreneurs, willingness to say, but why? Why should it be this way? Why isn't it this way? Like this, you can call it there's a great book, Start With Why. There's first principles thinking, but I think great entrepreneurs try to understand why it is, why it can be, why it should be, why it will be. And then there's this matter of vulnerability. I mean, you Tony, talk about, not just that everybody needs a compelling future, but also, you talk about rip it open. And I think entrepreneurs who are really there to play are there to say, I'm here to do this. It's not about me. It's about this. And it's about learning every day, and it's about being wrong, and it's about supporting others and not being the star of the show. And you have to be willing to a certain degree, like, be willing to lose yourself to become something better. And not to lose yourself to become less, to become something worse, but willingness to say, like, I think I'm great, and I think I'm so incomplete.
Yes.
I know I'm not the entrepreneur I need to be, but if I can do better today, if I can do better tomorrow. And that comes from building a great team. And it comes from looking at failure as learning. And that sort of vulnerability, I think, is core to being successful as an entrepreneur, and probably being happy as a person, is your willingness to be vulnerable.
It makes life meaningful, and makes people connect with you. When you pretend to have all the answers and no one does, you separate yourself from everybody, and suffering is separation, right? That's really what happens. But I think your point is so critical. Early in my life, I began to think about, why was I able to be able to touch so many people's lives? And it's like, I'm no genius. I just really care. I have so much drive and hunger. And one day I realized, to myself at least, I believe life supports whatever supports more of life. Meaning, if a bumblebee that's not supposed to be able to fly is going after what it wants in those flowers, it's got a higher purpose. It's pursuing its desire, but that pollen sticks to its legs. And now, sure enough, we pollinate, we have more flowers. Kind of like whatever you want for your life, your desire, de sire in Latin means of the Father, your desire has a higher purpose. And if your desire is just supporting you, you're going to get a certain level of insight because you're part of life, and life supports life. But if your desire is to help a family, now you get a different level of insight. If your desire is to help a community, and not what you tell other people, what your desire is, what your driving force is, you get a different. And if your desire to help humanity, which all of you have in common, as I do, and it's not what you position. I've watched how you all live. Anybody can watch how people's lips move. I watch how their feet move, where they put their money, their time, their energy, their focus. And all of you have dedicated your lives to this. So when you're trying to help humanity, regardless of what anybody else thinks, it. There are insights you get that you just won't get for any other reason, because you are supporting more of life. I really believe that's true. And Jason, what you're doing right now with food is so critical.
What you're hearing now is how people are using their talents, their gifts, to improve conditions for all of humanity. They're leveraging their passions to make the world a better place. But you don't have to transport people into outer space to be able to make an impact. You don't even need a degree. See, there are tools where you can hack your psychology that almost every great entrepreneur knows. They use these to make their dreams a reality and leave a legacy that benefits others. For the first time, Tony's going to be sharing these tools for free. It's an event called the New World, New You Challenge, taking place on January 21st. It's an amazing event that will not only provide a concrete roadmap where you can see your goals accomplished this year, but it'll awaken your soul for the months to come, no matter what life throws at you this year. To join this free challenge, go to www.make2021myyear.com. That's make2021myyear.com. We hope you'll join us.
Bacon, you're working with all these entrepreneurs, not just these three. We're working with COVAX. It's created the only vaccine that is not using live virus or manipulating mRNA. Doesn't have to be shipped at minus 80 degrees. So you're constantly finding these tools and these people. So you have to make these bets. What do you see? What have you done? And what do you see the most successful entrepreneurs do that succeed in spite of all the challenges versus the ones that have great ideas that die?
I'll say, first off, I actually don't think I was a particularly great entrepreneur. I was very focused on me when I was an entrepreneur, and that created a lot of limitations. And I could have had a much greater level of success if I was in the current orientation that I am, which is about service. And I'm really a servant to these three people and the CEOs of Kovacs and many other people. And at its core, there's only one thing that all companies that have succeeded have in common. They didn't give up. And that's like the starting ingredient. And so we look for people who have run into walls, and what they hear when they hear no is, oh, you haven't figured it out. I have to go figure it out. So that's the first step. The second step is what they've kind of pointed to, which is a really rare combination, having that kind of, I am going to make this happen no matter what, but being kind of flexible on what the this is, because you learn things from customers, you learn things from investors, you learn things from partners that mean you need to tweak the vision. The core is the same. We are going to make energy dramatically cheaper. We are going to make food supplies radically more cost effective. We are going to make space accessible to everyone over the long term. That vision isn't going to change, but they've all changed a lot about how they're doing it, whether it's an underlying piece of the technology or it's which hires they're making, and they're constantly iterating and adjusting. And there's what that comes down to is zero ego, right? These three people are some of the most successful people I've ever had the opportunity to work with. And they come to me and talk about, like, how am I getting this person to join my team? And they have no sense of how incredible they are, because they're not focused on themselves. And this is what we screen for. We screen for persistence. And then we use your top six, your model of human needs. And we look for people who are motivated by growing and giving. If you're motivated by growing and giving, and you're relentless, you will find a way to succeed. It may not even be in this particular company, but it might be in the next iteration of the company. I think 2 of the 3 companies we've backed with Bill are the 3rd or 4th iteration of that particular company. And that's the core of it. There's a lot of little details, but persistence and being motivated by growing and giving.
I thought of something, just thinking about entrepreneurship and listening to what everybody said. Definitely some of the incredible things about entrepreneurship. This is not required for success, but this is just what's so incredible about entrepreneurship in general, is you get to empower others. Like, you get a chance to really empower others. You get to unlock human potential. Like, you get to go to others in your company, give them an equity stake, and get them to do things they wouldn't have done otherwise. That you turn them into owners. Like, you think about if you go to a yogurt store and the person behind the counter is being paid minimum wage, or if the person's the owner, the different level of service you get because the person owns it. So you can turn all these people in your company into owners that think like that. And then a little bit what you're saying about your own learning. Being an entrepreneur is one of the biggest opportunities for self-discovery and self-learning. Like, you are always reaching, like, maybe like rock climbing, a new obstacle, a new barrier that you have to break and learn yourself. Like, you have to learn how to hire different people. You have to learn how to do the next stage of evolution of your company. Like, you're always learning. So if you like learning, entrepreneurship is incredible, because it's just going to always be throwing new things at you. A little bit, sometimes they're not the things you asked for, but they always cause you to learn. And that just makes it so exciting. It's so rewarding, just because you learn something every day.
Now, learning never stops.
Tony,
You've anticipated my next question, which for all of you is, I'm curious, and I know it's hard to do this because you've built multiple companies, built 150, right? Mikhail, 3 or 4, Jason, all that you've done. But what would you say is one of the single most important lessons you've learned in creating a world transforming company? It's different if you're just trying to compete in the marketplace with other people, or you're just trying to do something someone else has already done a little better. What's one of the most important lessons you've learned that will continue to guide you, that you've learned thus far in building your companies? And maybe I'll start with you, Bill, because you've done so many of them.
Well, I think you touched on it already. You start off with a particular passion and vision, and it's not going to turn out like you planned. Yeah. You need to keep that mission the same, otherwise you're giving up and making a different business. Yeah. But it's not going to be the way you initially envisioned it, and you have to have the flexibility and adaptability to adjust to what the market is telling you. There's that great Mike Tyson line about. Yeah. Everybody has a plan until they get punched in the face.
That's right.
And I actually feel that applies to business. Your customer punches you in the face. Like, you go out with this idea, and then all of a sudden the customer comes in, and it's like, you need to rebound from that, look at where that punch came from, figure out how to not get hit by that punch next time, and adjust. And if you give up after the first punch, it's over. But if you adapt and have a new stance and have a new path, you can go again, that zigzag path. You can go back to where you were trying to get, but it's not going to be the way you expected. So give us an example, if you would, of a punch that you got from customers, either by their not buying or stop doing, and then how you adapted and it became successful. So I had a company called Knowledge Adventure. We were making educational software for kids. I had a passion.
It was in the 1990s, right?
Yeah, exactly. Steven Spielberg was an investor, and we had all this great vision to help kids fall in love with learning, and it just wasn't working. We were making these great products. We poured our heart into it, but people just weren't buying them at enough rate to keep the company going. So in a Hail Mary, save the company move, all 65 employees went out into the retail stores on Christmas time and just stood in the aisles and demonstrated our products. We just walked our way in the store. We bribed our way in by giving a box of donuts to the guy at the front door to say, hey, we're here to demo. Like, we hadn't had permission. We were just there to demo the products. We opened up a laptop and started demonstrating. And
these were CD-ROMs in those days?
Right. This is like at CompUSA and Egghead Software and Fry's and stuff like that. Yeah. And what we saw in the aisle, well, one, we could boost the sales when we'd show up, but we only could go to 65 stores. There were 2,000 stores. We couldn't cover all of them. But we boosted the sales in those stores. But what we mostly saw was people picking up our product. A mother would pick up our product, look at both sides of the box, and put it down and walk away. We're like, gosh, she's got kids. She's the perfect product for her. Why aren't they buying it? And we realized our messaging was bad. Like, we weren't really conveying on the packaging. You couldn't try the software. There was no internet yet. It was 1993. No browser yet. No Netscape even until 1995. We weren't really communicating what was the benefit, even though we had our heart in that. We changed the name of the product from Knowledge Adventure to Jumpstart Kindergarten. Give your kids a boost on kindergarten. And now, instead of being for all kids and the parent wasn't sure if it was right for theirs, now it was good for 5-year-olds, like just 5-year-olds. If you have a 4-year-old, you're going to buy this product. So we narrowed down the focus so much to focus on only 1 year, but the product took off like crazy. And we got punched in the face by customers saying, I don't understand what you're trying to tell me. And we just changed our messaging to bop them over the head and explain what we were and what we were trying to do. And we took off like crazy. We sold 20 million copies.
20 million copies. And didn't you sell like first grade, second?
Yeah. So after having success with kindergarten, we made a whole series. We made Jumpstart Elementary, where we had one grade K through 6. And it was fantastic, but it was basically customers telling us, you're not explaining to me what you're doing. How can you fix that? And we racked our brains to figure out. Now that you hear the story, you go, well, it's obvious. Why didn't you do that? But it was not obvious to us until we actually watched customers at the moment of not buying to figure it out.
And that's the kind of reconnaissance that entrepreneurs got to do instead of staying back and in their head. I mean, so often entrepreneurs make the product they want versus the product the customer really wants and needs, right?
Now, if the customers had said, oh, make this a violent war game, then we would have said, no, that's not our mission. We can't do that. So we kept our mission of what we were trying to do, which is make kids fall in love with learning. We just had to explain how we were doing it differently.
And you sold that company for a nice profit too, didn't you?
No, we sold the company for $90 million a few years later to Vivendi. So it worked out very, very well. But the company went from almost going out of business to successful sale in just a few years, but only by listening to the customer.
Beautiful. Mikhail, can you tell us what's one of the most important lessons you've learned? You've built several companies, sold them. You worked in different countries doing this, in very different cultures doing this. What's one of the most important lessons that you've learned as an entrepreneur that guides you today?
Finally, the main reason why companies succeed and why company failed, it's a people, it's your team.
Yes.
Ultimately, nothing behind the company, technology, market, like the people, it's a main thing that you have. And it's interesting by moving from one country to another. I moved from Russia when I was 35. It's kind of time when you already like set up as a personality. So it's like you are moving to another country and living the second life. It's not like you move as a student or kid. So it's very interesting to see how different, even it's like everybody looks the same. Like you probably if you close your ears, you see the same people, they look the same, everything's the same, but it's very different. And I think like a main failures that I had in my entrepreneurial career was finally with building open and honest relationships with communications. And in many cases, like especially because Russian culture is kind of very leaning to some kind of politics, a little bit hypocrisy. We're more Oriental. And based on Russian standard, I was very Western. But when I now moved to the US, now I understand actually I'm more Russian. and I think like the main value that actually Dakin gave me, it was not the money. Actually, that he was my mirror. And he always like to tell me that how I look like and how I need to change myself. And I'm still working on me. It's not easy. I mean, for me, it's definitely working on my usual mode of, it's easier. And you always should remind yourself, hey, I mean, like, you need just like to talk to the people. What do you think? You don't need to actually have like several different stories. You need to just, and it's difficult to do, actually. It's really difficult to do, especially when you are in a company with many executives. Everybody is, have their own like ideas about everything. You don't want sometimes to heard personally these people, and it's hard. It's really hard because especially you like these people, everybody, and value of like open communication that finally need to come from you as a leader of the company. It's extremely important, and the larger company is more important because when a small company you can play, you can keep in mind everything, but when it's big company, the culture runs the company, and if you do not create this culture, then it's a recipe for failure. So I think like my main lesson, it's still I'm learning this lesson. I'm still trying to be the great entrepreneur and the leader of big company. I hope I can come through this, but it's real work.
Well, I hear three things then from you here. Well, one is I hear the right people in the right seats, right? Because we all know what that's like to have good people in the wrong seats. And it's like, you can have a situation where I've seen it as an investor and as an owner of companies. You get, a really great product and the wrong team, and they'll mess it up. You get a terrible product and the right team, they'll change the product or service and they'll find a way to succeed. So it's that. But then the capacity to attract those people is the vision that was talked about both by Bill and Jason and Dakin, the ability to have that vision that can attract those quality people, something that's pragmatic and real. But then, as you said, that requires you to keep growing because, there's that rule of 125. I'm sure you've all heard, right? That's why the Army is organized the way it is, military. When you get beyond 125 people, and it's a research shows, I don't know, the 125 is exact. People don't know each other as much. It's different culture, different community. So it's a big company, as you said, creating culture, the philosophy that drives all decision-making. Because in the beginning, I remember my companies, they'd say, well, what does Tony think? And what I had to train people to do is what's right. And once they knew the values and knew what's right, then the culture shifts. Now, I went from $50, $100 million companies to now we do over $6 billion across all these different industries and all these different employees, but there's a common culture in all those pieces. But the most important factor I really want to honor you for, Mikhail, and it shows your humility because you've built these huge companies, you're building $1 billion company moving forward now, is that capacity to never think you have all the answers and to make sure you keep growing. My original teacher, Jim Rohn, was just brilliant in this way. Because I remember I asked him one time, I said, I have 4 fathers. And I said, we never had enough money for food. One of the reasons I feed 100 million people a year, 100 million meals here in the US, and I created this billion-person challenge that we're 700 million meals now in 6 years. But I'm now doing this challenge for the whole world to feed the next billion. But the whole drive was, how come my fathers work so hard and we don't have money for food? And Jim Rohn said something really interesting. He said, Tony, your fathers have not worked hard enough on themselves. They've worked too hard on their job. They've not continued to improve themselves. I remember when I was doing Money Master Game, I asked Warren Buffett what the single most important investment he made in his life was. And I had these ideas in my head of, I knew all the different big investments he'd made. And he said, it's what you do. And it's what you're talking about. He goes, the best investment I ever made was in myself when I went to Dale Carnegie. He said, because when you invest in yourself and you keep growing, there's no limit to the impact that has. And putting an investment in a company is nice. He goes, but learning how to speak and communicate and expand. And then Jim Rohn said to me, he said, your fathers, I'm sure, are all good men, But he asked me what they did. And one of my natural father was, worked in an underground parking lot. And before automation, he used to take people's ticket, count it up, and make the money exchange all day long, day and night for 41 years. And he never had enough money. We didn't have money for food at times. And he said, Tony, it's like we're all equal as souls, but we're not equal in the marketplace. And what you have to do is make sure that you have a way to add more value than anybody else, which means you must work harder on yourself and growing anything else, and then you can lead people. And Mikhail, you're living by that, so I really honor you. Thank you for that. Jason, you understand the question. You've had a lot of lessons on both the medical side, helping the most complex thing, human brains, and now working here in agriculture and feeding people. What's the difference in your experience between those who dream and those who actually live the dream and actually make it happen in enterprise?
There's one thing that came up for me even before I talk about the most valuable things in building an enterprise. There's one thing that came up in what you just shared, Tony, and reflecting from Mikhail, this difference between values and virtues. Yes. Values are what you believe, and virtues are what you manifest. It's your behavior. Ben Horowitz does a great job with this in his last book. What you do is who you are. And that's a question I ask myself every day, is like, who am I by the actions that I'm taking? And that's a little bit more about the working on yourself. What are my virtues as opposed to what are my values? Yeah. In terms of building an enterprise, as I heard Bill sharing with his experience on Jumpstart, my mind. So we're 15 years later, more than 15 years later, where the value of learning, I think, has only been underscored by all of the different platforms that exist on the internet to allow you to learn. And so, you think about that, in that fast forward context, it's like, well, the vision there is, so Jumpstart started as a way to learn, and it had this immediately executable opportunity in Jumpstart Kindergarten. But what we know is that everybody wants to learn. Everybody wants to be better. That the vision for learning is infinitely scalable. And I think that's what differentiates good companies from great companies. Good companies have a business plan, have a market opportunity, have a customer base, and they execute on that. They're a good company. They're profitable. Great companies have an infinitely scalable vision with very clearly executable market opportunities. You see bad companies that have an infinite market opportunity and no executable vision. Yep. Right? You see that in a Theranos, for example, right? Yep. Like that's kind of now the case study of a company that had a fantastic, compelling vision, but didn't have a clear next step, didn't know how to put one foot in front of the other. And that's what makes great companies great, is you have this infinitely compelling vision, but at the same time, this very clear and sober view on what's the thing I need to do right now. What's the opportunity I can be profitable in right now?
That's great. That's succinct and clear and couldn't be more accurate. Thank you for that. Dakin, you're the final one wrapping up this question. What do you see as the difference? You see so many companies, so many entrepreneurs, so many visions that go unrealized, or they begin only to end in short, versus the ones that continually add value and continue to find a way to expand and grow and add value. What's the difference?
Well, I want to first just comment on what both Jason said about values and virtues and Mikhail said about culture. I think one of the proudest moments I've ever actually had as a business owner is when people on my team, like my assistant, has come to me and said, hey, like you're doing something that's not consistent with our culture. And having your team so on top of the culture and the values that you've promoted that they help you realize when you're messing up and when you're not living up to the highest standard. And I think it's just a cool part of the entrepreneurial journey if you can really nail it that way, so that it
and
really
if
is
you've got enough humility to actually hear it, not be pissed when someone tells that to
you. They said it less directly than I just said it.
Okay,
I was able to. I think on a tactical level, one thing I've seen a lot of entrepreneurs mess up is they don't know the difference between the things that need to be the breakthroughs for the company versus the things that they should follow, your phrase, success leaves clues. And we don't need to reinvent the wheel here. There's a lot of stuff in a business that you don't need to reinvent the wheel. You need to go out and figure out who is doing this really well. The place people get caught up is they want to feel important. They want to feel unique. They want to feel significant. And so they go try and spend a bunch of energy redoing things that other people have already figured out really well. And it's not energy that's going towards the one focused area that needs to be the breakthrough and needs to be the differentiator.
Yeah. So it's really concentrating on where the breakthrough is and not reinventing the wheel on wasting time on others and get caught up in the emotion of having to make it so personal. It's making what's personal what matters most. Really cool. I'm going to ask you one more question here, and then we're going to go deep. And for the people listening, we're going to go to each of you, go deeper into your companies, which I think people are going to find fascinating. But let's start one last on the universal level. I could probably end the podcast with this as well. But there's so much negativity in the press and the media. We know that there's nothing wrong. Media are good people. They work their tail off, and they have, I think, good intent. But the problem we have today is the economics of news. You know, the news is no longer about informing us. Its purpose is to startle us. Because, you know, we're not in the information age anymore. The information age died a long time ago. Now there's too much information. We're drowning in information, kind of starving for wisdom. And so what gets our attention, what snaps us, is something that jolts us. And so that's why it's your child may die of drinking water, film at 11. You know, it was just we see the insanity and how it builds more insanity. So in a world where there's so much negativity poured on a daily basis, we miss all the extraordinary things that are happening in the world. So I'm just wondering for each of you, what are the things that give you tremendous hope for the future? When things start to get a bit stressful or overwhelming, or looks like, you know, the end of the world to some people, you guys don't go there. I don't either. But what is it that gives you a hopeful and a optimistic and a sense of certainty that the future will be even better than today? Tell us your point of view. I'd love to start with you again, Bill.
Well, I think there's so many different ways to make the world a better place. If you're a teacher, you can teach thousands of kids in your lifetime and make a big difference there. If you're a preacher, you can change people's lives by telling them to see something that they don't see. If you're a lawyer, you can make laws to try and change things. I'm a technologist, so I love that way of doing things. I can't do the other ones very well. But what makes me optimistic is I think technology really can make the world a better place. And it can be pure, it can use your brain power, it can make people wealthy at the same time. And you can make it so that people pull it from you. You don't have to push it on them. You don't have to tell people to do something they don't want to do. Like, you make a better Tesla car, people just want it. He didn't have to bribe people to buy that. He didn't have to advertise it even. People just wanted it. So I just love the idea that, so the thing that gives me hope against all those things you said and all the noise in the world is, I don't want to quite say build a better mousetrap and people will beat a path to your door. That's not true. You do still have to stand out, and you have to make a whole bunch of other things work. But because the world is so flat now in terms of reach, that people aren't hiding under, comparing it to this, Leonardo da Vinci, he's in Florence. His radius of reach was 50 miles. Yeah. He was designing all these incredible things, but people knew about him for 50 miles away. Or maybe he would be known in Rome, but he would have to take a carriage there for a month, to get to Rome from Florence. We don't have that problem anymore. We have the whole globe as our reach. So you can use your brain power and actually positively impact people with things that they want. Yes. By filling that need. So, and you can bypass the press. Like, the press can't get in your way. If you make something that everybody wants, it doesn't matter what they say. Or at least I believe that. Or maybe I'm idealistic enough to want to believe that. But I feel that way.
Oh, you've proven it a couple times. More than a couple.
So I just feel very optimistic that you can look at society's problems, or a little bit like we've been saying as an entrepreneur. What is wrong with the world and how should it be? Let's invent the world that we want to live in. And let's try and make technology solutions to get there. And that's very exciting to me. So I feel very optimistic about being alive at this time. A little bit like Dakin said, it is one of the best times to be alive. Like, you really have what we have, the great standard of living that we have, joking about the Pharaoh getting on the plane. Like, what Pharaoh, think about a Pharaoh getting on a plane to go to Beijing today, complaining about the Wi-Fi, right? Complaining about the Wi-Fi. Think about what we have and what we can see with our minds and our brains and the power that we have today, and the little things we complain about. And yet there are some big things that we need to fix. And a little bit like you're talking about hunger. Like, we have food, and I hate the term that they use almost, food insecurity. That is a bad euphemism for people starving. You know, like think about it. Like I know what myself, well, like if I don't eat at noon, my brain starts going, in shutdown mode. I can't even think straight. Like think about how bad it is that we have people on this planet who are going hungry. Like that's ridiculous. So we've got to solve that. What you're doing is incredible. And all the technology solutions we can come up with to aid and abet that are so powerful. I think we can make a really big difference. So I'm very optimistic.
Me too, because I really believe that any problem humanity has created, humanity can solve. Totally. Even problems we haven't created, like, the sun will eventually blow out this earth, right? It's going to explode and destroy it. And you got people like, Elon and Mikhail and people of that nature that are looking out and thinking that long term. I think, whatever is overwhelming is because you're only looking at the moment and you're lost vision. It's like, everybody knows there's two things that drive us, fear or faith. And they're both made up. Imagine, what is fear versus faith? They're both imagination. Imagination about the future. No one knows what it is. But fear is imagination undirected. And so it's like weeds. It grows you and rips you to pieces. But, faith is what every entrepreneur employs. And I think a lot of people have forgotten that. There's this 4-letter word that the whole world is having to come to grips with for some reason. There's an illusion because we've been growing so fast and have so much technology and such great quality of life. It's that 4-letter word called risk. And every entrepreneur knows that you only rewarded to your ability to produce rewards beyond the risk by taking risks, by putting yourself on the line. If you're going to look for absolute certainty and security, you need to go to prison or you need to stay home forever. But the world we're in now, any problem we have, we can solve. And, Peter Diamandis, my dear friend and partner, always says, find a giant problem and you got yourself $1 billion company. Because if you can solve it, you can make that happen. And I think that's what we all as entrepreneurs, what drives us. And that's what drives the most successful entrepreneurs. Some just want to make money. There's nothing wrong with making money. Don't get me wrong. But, money is only a reflection of added value. You don't make $1 billion unless you've helped billions of people, or at least 1 billion people with something significant. And all of you are driven by that. Let's go with you, Mikhail. What gives you hope in when things look a little crazy? What's your hope? What gives you a sense that the future, even the short-term future, will be greater than the past has been?
Probably it's a not fair question to me because it's a very easy question to me because I've gone in a house with no indoor toilets, like sporadic electricity. I started with a kerosene lamp. I spent my first 16 years in the Soviet Union in a small, a small town with 10,000 population. So, and I see how the life around has changed. Even let's look on Russia, which kind of now run by by Batman. Let's put it this way. But still, if you look on a people, if you look on the younger people, the technology that we have all the access, like the internet and the knowledge and the books. I mean, I have all the hopes. It's actually very difficult for dictatorships become sustainable in the new world because people is educated now. People know what's happening in other countries. My grandparents never been abroad. My grandparents didn't know what's happening in another country. But now people, except maybe for few very totalitarian countries, which kind of created medieval regimes like Northern Korea. People everywhere know what's happening. And I think this actually gives us a lot of hope that society is moving to the right direction and technology helping us. I mean, there are some bad things that happens, in China with Uyghurs when they use technology for concentration camps. But I think the general direction is it's very good. And I think we will be seeing the better society in the future that will be open to humanity, open to unlocking the power of each individual man, be fair for people who is weak and cannot not capable, but at the same time stimulating people to achieve new horizons. So it's difficult to see when you just live the short life, maybe in US, in 5-10 years, everything changed up and down. But when you see this a greater perspective, and I basically saw two systems, the Soviet system. Yeah. And I can see it's very different. So I think we're moving as humanity to the right direction, and we'll find a way to build the better society, the open society.
As you said, the technology has made people around the world know what's possible. The breakthroughs in I went to the Soviet Union when I was 23 years old. I was invited, and it was still the Soviet Union. And I got to experience what it was like there. I traveled from Moscow to Siberia, to where you were, and back. Got to meet the people, got to experience it. But it turned me into a capitalist. I wasn't even interested. I didn't know what capitalist was. All I knew was everybody's supposed to be equal. It sounded so good to me. You know, everybody talks about socialism or communism, and there's the description of it, and then there's the reality of it, right? And so you start to see that, you know, it wasn't equal, not even slightly. I watched people in Moscow standing around 3 blocks so they could get half a loaf of bread and a little bit of milk all day long. And we were on a train with all these other Soviets. They were having caviar and having this incredible quality of life. It just doesn't work that way. But the fact that people could see a better life is what brought down that wall. It's what created that drive and so forth. And obviously leaders like Mikhail Kokorich who were willing to consider things in a new way. But you're right, the world is flattened. And now, you know, a tribesman in Kenya can now, with that little cell phone, provide education from MIT, from Harvard. He can do business around the world. He can transfer finances. I mean, he can do anything he wants. I remember when I worked with President Clinton, and I remember there was a day when he and I were talking, and he said, we want to keep these conversations private. I said, I agree. I said, why don't we consider using email? And he goes, I've heard about that. I said, yeah, there's this thing called AOL. You should get an email account. In our first communications by email, I found out that the world knew I'd worked with him because showing my wife at the time, I said, yeah, you can search things on here. Like I typed my name in and boom, for that day, the Washington Post came up and talking about my working with the president. It's like, that's how much the world has changed. A person in Kenya with a little cell phone has more technology, more access to research, more economic, more everything than the President of the United States did a couple decades ago. It's pretty wild. That certainly should give us hope because the process is accelerating. Now, of course, Bill and Mikhail, I think we'd all agree that technology isn't one-sided. A lot of people, yeah, technology could destroy us. Well, electricity can light up a city or you can kill somebody. So it is still the way it's used, but good seems to have overcome evil for the most part throughout human history. And my optimism is that trend probably won't change.
Has an element of, right? And like, where am I driving to? What's my destination? And I try to think about the things that are within my control. It's like give me the strength to accept the things that cannot change. And right, it's like where am I driving? What's within my power? And to get caught up on like, is climate change a real question? And is it a real threat to humanity? Absolutely. But just to focus on the question, we're not going anywhere, right? All we're doing is we're in bumper to bumper traffic, screaming about how terrible it is. But little do we know that we're headed to the promised land, right? Like that's sort of what I think about is where are we going and who's driving, and then I ask myself, am I driving and where am I going? And if I'm not driving, then I know that I'm looking at the question or I'm looking at the situation wrong, and I look at what can I do right now to get to the destination that I want to get to.
And you just hit on what I found the most successful people, regardless of entrepreneurs. And I always tell people there's 3 questions that we're always asking, 3 decisions. And one is, what are you going to focus on, right? Whatever you focus on is what you're going to feel, true or not. If you think of the worst possible scenario, you're experiencing it now. It's why that old phrase, coward dies 1,000 deaths, courageous person once, so it's a real problem, you handle it. Because what's wrong is always available, but so is what's right. And so hearing you, the second question that people see is when they're asking what am I going to focus on, do you focus on what you can control or what you can't control? And you already said what you focus on. I focus on what I can control. Focus on what you can't control. You keep focusing on what you don't have instead of what you do have. You keep focusing on the past. You get those 3 patterns, you're going to be pissed off, frustrated, depressed. But successful people focus on what they can control. They focus on what they do have and how to use it to add more value. And they tend to focus on the present and the future as opposed to the past you can't change. Beautiful, Jason. Dakin, round it off with you. What gives you hope? I know you have more than hope, optimism, excitement about the present and future. When things look poorly, what do you focus on? What gives you hope?
Well, first I'll say I have absolute certainty that the future is going to be better than it is today. And we have tons of evidence of this. And what it comes down to for me is actually what Prime Movers Lab is about. It's about science and service. More abstractly, it's about matter and spirit. And if we look at both of these realms, we are having tremendous progress. Civilization from a material level is defined by an infrastructure of energy, transportation, and communications. If you look at any time there's been a step change in any of these things, the Industrial Revolution, the printing press, the average human being's life has gone upwards in life expectancy, but more importantly, in quality of life during that life expectancy. And it's just without a doubt, you ask anyone, all of the right technologies are being put in place right now to make it so that the average human being can live on more food, more energy, more joy, more whatever it is that they want than at any other point in human history without having to do much. And we're going to be in that place of radical abundance within the next 30 or 40 years, just from the resources that we're producing. But the second question is there the willingness to solve all of those problems? This is we were just seeing Sadhguru talk, thanks to you. And he talked about how we have to have the willingness. And what that boils down to is the level of consciousness, the piece of spirit. And if we look at what is happening in the world, you held an event with hundreds of thousands of people, maybe even 1 million people earlier this year. The number of people that are interested in raising their consciousness, the number of people that are pursuing meditation, pursuing spirituality is unprecedented. And these things actually go hand in hand, right? In a world, at least in the West, where people are freed up of maybe some of the day-to-day drudgery of a particular job, there is more time to invest in themselves. There's more time to go after what is life really about for me in the big picture. And I just think the media is not showing us an accurate picture of what's really happening in a person's day-to-day life. Just to say it simply, I watched the movie Love Actually with the family during Thanksgiving, and you look at everyone greeting each other in an airport. You look at everyone welcoming each other home. And there's just a level of love that most people actually have in their day-to-day life. That's not what the stories are in the news. And you take that plus the power of technology, we are going to have unbelievable lives. There'll be ups and downs, but we're going to have unbelievable lives beyond anything most of us can imagine.
In fact, the truth is most of us already have unbelievable lives. It's one of the things that I noticed when there was the people that were protesting years ago, and they're saying, the 1% are dominating the planet and I have a terrible life. And I was looking at the people that was in Wall Street, they had the encampment. I actually drove over there and I hung out and chatted with a few people. And they were holding brand new computers, iPhones that cost more than the average person. And 2/3 of the planet couldn't live on what they spent on one phone. They're drinking a coffee from Starbucks that costs more than most people live on per day. And they're going, those terrible 1%ers. And if you actually look at it, if you live in the United States and you're in poverty, and I hate anybody in poverty. That's why I work to feed so many people, just one approach to doing things. But if you live in poverty in the United States, you're in the top 10% of earners in the world. Right? Those people that are complaining about 1% are the 1%. They just don't realize it, what they compare to. So I think sometimes we don't make the progress because we buy the stories that have been told to us, that have been sold to us, to get us aggravated. Anyone who's watching this right now or listening to this podcast, if you haven't watched The Social Dilemma, please do. And it's on Netflix, I believe, or you can pick up a book by, I think his name is Lanier, the guy that wrote How to Get Rid of Your Social Media Accounts, or at least use them more intelligently. And we're like lab rats for a group of people that are basically getting paid to keep us online through dopamine hits by reinforcing what we believe and then pissing us off so we stay online longer. We have an incredible life now and an incredible life in the future, but we got to wake up to it. Otherwise, you can have this incredible life and you can live in misery. Suffering, we have the greatest economic environment in history, even with the challenges we're facing right now. And yet most people at the peak before COVID, before any of these issues, during the peak economic times, we have the lowest levels of happiness measured in 40 years in this country. Because what happens is people start expecting, it's like this, the phone you have, people banging on it, it's not doing it fast enough. It's going to a satellite, give it a moment. It's just we've turned our lives into all this expectation, which makes us miserable instead of appreciation, which is what makes our life rich. So let's shift now. We've been going for a while here and our listeners have been with us, and I hope they've gotten some great understanding of what you're doing generally, but also the principles that have made you all, build companies that can literally shift the quality of life here in the world and made you plenty of money, billions of dollars in some cases for your companies. Let's go back now and let's hit each of you for a few minutes, if I may, with just 3, 4, 5 questions each. Just go a little deeper. And I want to go back to you, Bill, if I may. And I want, if you would, give us, what it is that made you start Idea Lab. Like, what was the conceit of that? Because there weren't a bunch of, people out there, building incubators. You want to be first in the world, and you're the longest running one. What was in your mindset about that? What made that such an important component? And then if you wouldn't mind, share us just one story, because you and I have talked about this before personally, about Google AdWords, which, you played a huge role in. But the story is really interesting in terms of the ups and downs. And just a few minutes of it, I think, will inspire entrepreneurs or anybody even considering being an entrepreneur, and also give them what you said earlier, which is what you start out as thinking it is, it ain't one of what it's going to be. So would you share a little bit of that for us?
I had started a company after college that was acquired by Lotus Development. And then I started Knowledge Venture, which we talked about, that was acquired by Vivendi. But just before it was acquired, it was 1995, and Netscape had its IPO. And the browser, there were 30 million browsers in the world, 30 million. Think about how low a number that is when you think about it now, because there's 4 billion people with connected phones, and maybe more. 4 billion is probably an old number. But 30 million people who you could communicate with directly through a browser. And I thought that was the most amazing thing, because all my prior companies, I had to go struggle to get each new customer, either through a retail channel or through advertising in the yellow pages or putting up flyers. Like, my reach was very small, sort of like Leonardo da Vinci we talked about earlier, very small radius. All of a sudden I could talk to the whole world, 30 million people. So I thought, wow, there's so many things you can do. You need to make a yellow pages online. What about buying cars online? What about this? And I thought, boy, there's an opportunity to reinvent many businesses. I don't even know which one I should start first. I don't want to start one of them. I want to start all of them. So what about if I, instead of being a serial entrepreneur, which I was, maybe I could become a parallel entrepreneur and do them under one roof. And what I would do is prototype the ideas, recruit great CEOs to run each one of them, put in the seed capital, help them grow and build the businesses. And I would try a bunch of them. Some of them would fail, but I thought, this maybe would be a way to encourage more people to take risk, your 4-letter word, because what happens if one of them fails? Well, we'll just start a new company. So I wanted to try and have a safety net of risk so that you could take that chance on a new idea. But if it doesn't work out, it's not that bad. It would not be a scarlet letter. Already, by the way, in the United States, we have way less of a scarlet letter on failure than, say, in Europe or in other places of the world, where if you fail, sometimes people don't want to back you a second time. I actually view failure as a badge of honor, not as a badge of failure. It's a badge of honor if you learn from it. If you didn't learn from it and you ignore it, it's failure. But if you actually learn from it, so that gave me the inspiration to start Idea Lab. We would start 10 companies under one roof. We'd try it for 1 year. We'd see if it would work out. Well, of those 10 companies, a few of them went on to be very successful. That allowed me to keep funding it and keep it going. And now 24 years later, it's still running, because that fundamental concept of putting things together, learning from each of them, did work. So,
and how many companies, we've talked about successes, 150 companies. It's incredible.
Yeah, but 60 failures. I
got that's all I want people to know. And by the way, that's an unbelievable ratio. That's like being one of the greatest batters in history, right? Because it doesn't work that way in Silicon Valley, but you managed to do it. What do you think? Why have you, of course you've had the failures, but why do you think you've been able to help so many of them succeed?
Well, we've gotten better over time because we've learned some of these lessons.
Yes.
Some of the lessons I already talked about if your product doesn't have enough differentiation, you're just competing with everybody else, and there's not. If you don't find entrepreneurs with enough passion, you have to have that vision so you can stick with it through. Timing matters a lot. Sometimes you just have the unfortunate luck of timing. A recession comes and hits and wipes out 5 companies. I mean, like 2008, 2009, that was awful. The companies, some of them were actually doing very well, but they just couldn't raise any more money. So bad timing wipes out companies. Probably the biggest one, though, is timing in the other direction. Is the world ready for your idea?
Yeah, if you're a pioneer with arrows in your back, right?
Oh yeah. You start out, and maybe it's even going to be a good idea in 5 years, but can you make it 5 years till it's a good idea? So, but that means maybe taking your money and spending it more thoughtfully to last 5 more years till the world's ready for you. A lot of times, entrepreneurs, teams, they're in a hurry. I need to build my brand. I need to hurry up. I need to spend on marketing. Well, wait a minute. Why are you spending on marketing if the world can't even buy what you're making yet? That money's going to be wasted. But convincing people to not build, everybody, you hire a person, VP of marketing, what do they want to do? They want to do marketing. So really having a balance between when the world is ready for what you're making and what you're making is very, very critical. So a lot of the genesis of Idea Lab was just to scratch my own itch of wanting to do so many things. And one other, which is, it's very, very important for a company to focus. Focus is a big, big deal.
Yeah.
We didn't talk about that earlier.
Yeah.
You need to be laser focused on what you're doing. Like you got to pick the thing you're doing. If you want to be better at it than everybody else, it's a little bit like if you want to win the Olympics, you better be focused on working out and trying and learning and getting better and better and better. Well, that's true of a business too. You got to be focused. But I wasn't focused. I was unfocused. I had a lot of different ideas and I wanted to do all of them. And I learned that at Knowledge Venture got better and better the more focused I was. The more things I shed that were off focus made Knowledge Venture do better. So I realized the only way I'm going to succeed as a human being with my unfocus is to build individually focused companies, which are laser focused on their target, but I could be more like a bumblebee and jump around to each of them and pollinate each one a little bit.
Yes.
And maybe Dakin, that's what you do now. Dakin, you have an ability to help many companies, and then you, Tony, you help millions of people, right? You're able to spread. So I thought Idea Lab would be a construct to allow me to do what I want to do, but still have companies that individually are successful. So that was my story for that. The story of goto.com/overture/AdWords is a wild one.
Please share this. I want you all listening to this because this is such an instructive story about your ability to navigate through things, as well as all the things you talked about, timing, et cetera. So please do share.
It's 1997. Internet is still young. We've got about 20 companies in our portfolio. They're all trying to get attention on the internet, buying ads. AOL would charge you $3 million to buy the gardening section, and they wouldn't tell you how much traffic you're going to get. They wouldn't tell you how many page views you're going to get. They wouldn't tell you how many clicks you were going to get. It was ridiculous. And I was telling our CEOs, you can't do that. You need to know. The whole point about internet advertising is it should be accountable. You should know what you're going to get. And Yahoo was doing the same thing. Yahoo was charging on a CPM basis, cost per 1,000 ads, not telling you the quality of the view or anything like that.
And this is for everyone to realize, this is prior to Google doing anything. Yahoo was the driving force. Some people are too young to even know it.
Yeah.
People only thought about search. They thought of Yahoo in those days. No one does.
So the only way they were showing the search results was based on the frequency of the word on the page. So in other words, if you type in the word cars, looking for a good website on cars, the website that would show up higher was the one that had more occurrences of the word cars on it. So everybody figured that out. So all they would do is put the word cars on the page to get higher. So everybody was in a spamming war to get more and more spam. So I started thinking, how could we come up with a way to fix that problem? All of my companies want to buy cost-effective clicks. They all want to pay on a click-through basis, not on a CPM basis, and not $3 million for 3 years with unknown traffic. And we had this idea, after trying 10 other ideas through all of 1997, that none of them worked. We had this idea, what about if we charge on a click-through basis on each keyword? What about if we have an auction for every word in the English language and in every language? So on the word cars, websites could bid a click-through price, and the higher they bid, the higher they would show up. Well, that means you're just paying money to get the people to come to your website. Well, yeah, but if you pay money, you're not going to buy the wrong keywords because you have to be valid on cars to pay for the word cars. And so I came up with that idea, and everybody argued against it. Oh, that's ridiculous. You can't charge people for search listings. You can't charge people a search engine. I said, well, wait a minute. Yellow Pages does that. That's how you get ads in the Yellow Pages. The bigger ads show up first, then the smaller ads, and then the listings are at the end. Why don't we just be very transparent about what we're doing and tell what the cost per advertiser is and display it? So we did that. We started that in February of 1998, little search engine called Goto, goto.com. You go to goto.com, you type in a keyword, and all the listings would be sorted by price descending, and then the regular listings would be at the bottom. So we still would show everybody. It's just that you could show up higher if you bid more. What would happen was better results would rise to the top. They actually would, because you couldn't afford to pay 50 cents a click if you weren't relevant on that keyword, if you weren't actually delivering promise on that keyword.
Right.
Businesses loved it because they could all of a sudden have transparency in what they were buying. So we got a huge flood of business. Revenues took off like crazy. And soon, actual searchers loved it because they were getting valid businesses. They weren't getting spam anymore. Company took off like crazy, went public in a year, went to over $1 billion valuation. Unbelievable. We were doing hundreds of millions in revenues. And then in 1999, Google came out. And Google came out as a search engine with another way to improve relevance that was brilliant. It was called PageRank after Larry Page. And it was based on link strength. Their Stanford thesis was about, what about if we use the number of links into a website as a measure of the relevance of that website? And that was genius. And that was really good for non-commercial terms. So Google started taking off like crazy for non-commerce related searches. And we were taking off like crazy for commerce related searches. And I said, oh my God, we got to partner with them. And they came to us and said, we got to partner with you. You know how to make money. We have no revenues. We got to combine forces. We had numerous chances to combine with Google, and all of our chances didn't come to pass.
What got in the way?
Yeah, both ways. Well, one time, our board of directors turned it down because they said, how can we acquire a company with no revenues like that? We're a public company. We got to justify this to shareholders. So it was just unbelievable what a great merger it would have been. But eventually, Google did go ahead and use our method of bidded listings, and they infringed on our patents, actually. We took them to court and said, you're infringing on these patents. And they said, well, we'll buy these out. They settled and bought them out for hundreds of millions of dollars, which turned out to be one of the biggest patent settlements of the time, but way too little compared to how valuable they were. But still, it was very, very valuable to us. And then Yahoo ended up seeing how valuable we were and acquired our company. So Yahoo ended up acquiring our company so that they would have a way to compete against Google. We were very, very proud to have played a place in the monetization of search. So Google invented probably the best search ever, but we invented maybe the best monetization of search. And together,
which has made Google one of the most successful companies in the history of the world. It started with the idea that you put it together, Bill Gross, you and your team. It's pretty amazing. What did you learn from that lesson, though? Because there were so many ups and downs. What did you pull from it?
One definitely was, we thought we had something really, really big, and I feel we should have held out to grow it bigger. And other of our investors were so happy to get a multi-billion-dollar exit that we sold to Yahoo. And I wish we had stayed longer in it, because I think we realized it. I actually said, guys, I think this is a $100 billion opportunity. And people laughed at me, Bill, $100 billion. Actually, that was too little. It was bigger than $100 billion. But I was just picking the highest number I could think of as to how out there could I be. And they thought I was nuts. But I was nuts too low, not too high.
That's near $1 trillion now. That's insane. What else did you learn from that you want other entrepreneurs to hear?
Well, the other thing I would say, when we first started out with the initial idea, people poo-pooed it. People said that is a really, really terrible idea to put money in search engine listings. But we really knew this is important. This is the way it should work. This is. So the lesson I would take away from that, which I didn't know at the time, but I say in hindsight, is if you really believe something is true, and people are poo-pooing it, don't listen to them. We didn't. We stayed with it. Like if I had listened to people telling me, stop that, we would have seen the bad review in the Wall Street Journal the day we came out, and we would have given up, and we didn't. When you see something that you know is right, sort of contrarian, like I was talking about earlier, stick with it. Fight through to make it be. Till now look at you, and everybody knows that in hindsight, it's obvious. But it wouldn't have happened if we didn't push it through. Like we had in the sort of the 3 stages of truth, first everybody ignores it, then they ridicule it because they actually are threatened by it. And then finally they accept it as being self-evident. I feel that if you push through and take an idea that is ridiculed and make it self-evident, you have actually changed the world. Like that is actually changing the world, because you made something happen that wouldn't have happened otherwise. So as an entrepreneur, when you feel that and in your heart, you're fighting for something that actually is important, keep the fight up, keep going. Because that means you're actually going to make a difference.
Well, for all those that are still with us, I hope that what you got from this, my goal in doing this was to maybe create a moment of excitement in you where you think about the future in a different way, where you don't just listen to the news, which every day is droning on, and it has an agenda. Its agenda is not a harsh one. It's just an agenda that there's an economics to that news, unfortunately. And so good ideas rarely interrupt you. They have to be pursued. You have to look for them. So our goal here is to put you in front of those tools that can give you a greater sense of what's happening in the world, both so you can be a first mover yourself and perhaps make use of those things that are valuable for you. Secondly, we all need to become investors. You can use an Apple phone or you can own part of Apple. The reason so many people suffer financially is not because the opportunity isn't there, and it's not because they don't earn enough money. It's because they're consumers, they're not owners. And if there's anything I hope this will get you to do is to think about the future in a new way that excites you, to get you through the temporary ups and downs of issues like COVID or racism. They're all real issues, but there's nothing humanity has created that humanity can't solve, as we've already said. But also, if you want to participate in helping those people that are working on the cutting edge of increasing the quality of life for all people, you can become an owner with them, and you can prosper as they prosper in helping millions, tens of millions, hundreds of millions, or perhaps billions of people. So hope this has been inspiring for you. And if you're an entrepreneur, I hope you've listened to some of the great lessons that these entrepreneurs have given us by taking a couple hours of their time to just share from the heart what they've learned. So I want to thank you, Bill Gross, the most successful entrepreneur in growing companies from nothing to over $1 billion. He's already got 7. No one's done that. If you're listening, it looks like he's got his 8th and 9th and maybe 10th one on the way. Mikhail, for what you're doing to open up space. Jason, for what you're doing to help us and make Brooklyn a farming environment, but any place be a farming environment with both, as you said, not only cheaper costs and better nutrients, but delicious. And Dakin, for your incredible pioneering efforts to pull together such great entrepreneurs. It's been a pleasure to spend time with all of you again. I love you. I respect you. And for all of you at home, thank you for joining us again for the Tony Robbins podcast. Till we see you soon. Live strong, live with passion, and God bless.
The Tony Robbins podcast is directed by Tony Robbins and produced by the Tony Robbins team. Copyright Robbins Research International.